Welcome to the Jargon Podcast. This is Bill Aimone. I'm here with my special guest, Joe Janeka. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you having me.
Today, we're going to break down a new word that I heard recently called Zero Trust Security. And Joe's going to break it down for us and help us understand what that means. But just for some background, Joe, give a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. I'm Joe Janeka, CEO of Parsolvo. I've spent about 20 years on both the service provider side as well as end customer side doing IT delivery, cybersecurity, and application development.
So you are a IT guru then. You know all there is about cybersecurity and probably staying on top of all the things that are happening out there in the cybersecurity world, right?
I wouldn't go as far as guru, but I certainly stay on top of emerging trends, and zero trust architecture is definitely the newest evolution that everybody should be paying attention to.
Okay, so you probably have some good cybersecurity stories then.
I do, but none that I can share.
None that you can share. Okay, well then let's move on and talk about zero trust security and what does that mean? I mean, when I hear the word zero trust, that kind of scares me a little bit. Like you're not going to trust anybody, or what does that really mean in English?
Yeah, not only not trusting anybody, but also not trusting the devices they use or the networks they're on and the services that they're trying to access.
Okay, so how is zero trust security different than just plain old security?
Sure. So traditionally, security is kind of an outside-in approach. You have a strong outer perimeter, and then once you have access into a network, you're essentially trusted to do whatever you want within that network.
So a traditional security model basically is like I lock the doors to my house, but if let's say a wild animal gets in my house, they can do whatever they want.
Correct.
Okay, so a burglar or anything like that, that's probably a better example than a wild animal.
Correct. If they can bypass your lock by opening your window and getting in your house, they're free to do what they want.
So it's almost like the traditional security model is just like one layer of saying, I lock my doors and you hope for the best.
Right. Yeah, it's an outside-in approach, right? Once you're inside, you can access resources and do whatever essentially you're free to do.
It's almost as if that the traditional models really, it sounds like it'd be easy for someone to break into. So if I can break in through your network, then I can go in there and pretty much move bank accounts and do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, in a sense. So it's got issues with once you get past the outer defense, there's really no other defenses that are in place to validate that you should have access to the data or that there's a rogue service or device running on your laptop that you might be able to compromise systems or spread malware, things of that nature.
How did the concept of zero trust security come about? Where did that come from?
So it's evolved over the years. It started as a NIST discussion, and the premise was...
Okay, stop for a second. What is NIST? For our listeners out there.
Sure. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're the U.S.-based body that governs or provides guidance around regulatory frameworks. So that could be frameworks that govern credit card transactions, such as PCI, or health records, which people might be familiar with HIPAA, and then other guidance that's more industry-specific for critical infrastructures.
Okay, so it's like the FDA of critical infrastructure.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I didn't mean to draw you off track there. So anyway,
Sure.
It's basically sanctioned by NIST in essence. So keep going there.
Yeah, so they have a special publication. So that's how NIST offers their guidance is through what's called a special publication, which is a enthralling, generally between 120 to 640 page read that everybody would love to be able to cozy up to on the couch and pour through. But from there, the guidance is really distilled down into what's called controls or control layers. And that's the premise of zero trust architecture, is aligning your security controls to be able to authenticate users, devices, services, and data.
So once inside of your network or inside the company, what are some examples and ways that a company would deploy zero trust security and use it?
Sure. A couple things. One is, do you have a business use case where one device, let's say a laptop or a desktop, ever needs to communicate with another laptop or desktop? Or do your endpoints really only need to communicate with servers, network devices. So that's kind of the first thing. So you can put in place what's called EDR, which is endpoint detection and response. That is essentially an antivirus plus a network monitoring sensor that detects and remediates communication between devices that should not occur. So you can create policies that are applied down at the device level to enable or disable access to any specific resource. So where this comes into play is a lot of corporate environments. The desktops don't have any need to communicate directly with each other. They need to communicate with maybe a network file share or an internet service, but they don't really need to access data on other endpoint devices. So you would create a simple policy that just says, I don't want any laptop to talk to any other laptop on my network.
Okay, so it's almost like I might have a trigger or something or an alarm set that says something unusual. We should not have a laptop talking to another laptop, but we can have a laptop talking to a printer because that's what it normally does.
That's exactly right.
So it's anything that's unusual that you would build a use case around. Or my house, I would have a alarm or something or a camera in that room that would set an alert saying somebody's in your room. That's unusual for somebody to be in my room when we're not home.
Correct.
Sounds like pretty complicated. How do you figure all that out? What do you do?
So it's a step-by-step approach, and there's tools that help you manage it. In today's modern workplace where you have a combination of remote and on-site workers and devices, you really want to take a layered approach to address each item individually. And there's tool sets to help you do that, but NIST provides pretty strong guidance around how that should work.
Okay, so setting up some use cases around things that shouldn't work, that aren't usual. What other things do you have to put in place? And I'm almost thinking of if someone wants to access my laptop, maybe I get an alert or allow that. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so there's going to be times where certain individuals may have access to, let's say, an accounting server, but others in the organization never need that. So you can deploy what's called conditional access, which is one of the core building blocks of a zero trust architecture. Conditional access essentially allows or disallows access based on a user's identity.
So that essentially prevents people, even if they've logged in and they're logged into something, a network, and they're part of the network, that prevents them going somewhere where they shouldn't be going.
Correct.
And particularly accounting type stuff. So I guess that kind of folds a lot into controls in a company.
Yep. And as part of that, maybe it is an authorized user that can have access to the system, but maybe they, for whatever reason, the device they're on hasn't received a critical security update. You can actually block access, even though that's an authorized identity, an authorized user that could access the accounting server typically, because they're not in accordance with the company's patch policy. You can force that device to require being patched before allowing access to the resource.
So give me an example of that. When you say
So very simple Windows update, maybe an update it failed to install and the user didn't know it. IT hasn't gotten around to fixing it. You can use the automated mechanisms from Zero Trust toolset to be able to do a posture assessment against that device and then create a policy, yes or no. In this case, it would be don't allow any devices that don't meet our patch standard.
It sounds like it could slow things down from a business perspective. Is that a problem when they're trying to put a zero trust architecture in place?
Not when implemented properly. So there is definitely always a trade-off between securing assets, services, and identities and the user experience. So our general recommendation is automate as much as possible and then manage by exceptions through comprehensive monitoring.
Okay, so let's maybe step more broadly here. Tell me about the steps you guys go through when let's say you've got a client that they're talking to you and they're saying, look, yeah, we've got a firewall around our network, but that's all we really have, and we've got some critical assets. Maybe they're part of energy infrastructure, or maybe they're part of telecommunications where there's private information. What are the first things you do?
Sure. So for us, it always starts with some sort of workshop to really understand the current state environment, understand the culture, what the philosophies are of the users, and where they want to guide their overall security operations. From there, we use a very basic set of controls, and it's an industry standard that's called the CIS critical control set.
Where does that come from?
So that comes from CIS.
So you're going to basically have a set of standards that you're going to apply. Okay.
Correct. So these controls, they used to be called the SANS Top 20 controls, if you remember the SANS Institute. So essentially they govern everything It all starts at establishing a software inventory and a hardware inventory. And then once you have your inventory, are you able to control those software and hardware components through a central means? And so a lot of Zero Trust requires the automation and discovery because it's too much to keep up with manually. And that's where organizations can get in trouble, is by trying to put in place pseudo processes because they don't want to invest in the proper tool sets. And so Zero Trust does require commitment to automated tool sets that can be self-documenting in a lot of ways.
Okay, so when you say automated tool sets, are there off-the-shelf products out there that do that?
Correct, and they'll require customization. Usually it's an IT asset management, IT service management tool set.
Okay.
So think in terms of brand names, it could be ServiceNow or Avanti, or on the smaller scale, Service S Plus from Manage Engine. Those are all common systems that would establish the inventory and maintain it.
Okay, all right, that's good, because our last podcast we interviewed Peter Purcell, who shared with us IT service management, IT asset management. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go back and listen to that podcast. And just a little plug there for Peter on that one. So I think that's important to understand the scope of what IT service and asset management can do for an organization. So you're talking about having that good inventory. Now, does that also expand into other technology? And I'm thinking like operational technology that are on machines, like your PLCs, all that kind of stuff that are operating maybe something on the shop floor, or even a meter out on a pipeline or something?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Bill. So the spec that governs what we call the operational technology, or OT side of the house, is IEC 62443. That's an international standard, similar to NIST, but instead of being US or North American based, it's global. And the critical controls combined with the Zero Trust roadmap meet 83% of level 1 maturity, 75% of level 2 maturity, and 66% of level 3 maturity for those controls. So organizations that implement Zero Trust really only have about 7 or 8 additional supplemental controls that they need to implement to be fully compliant.
So you go through this kind of workshop and assessment, get an inventory of what they have. Where do risk assessments come into play here? Is that kind of part of the process as well?
It is. And risk assessments can be done in 2 ways. One, to establish a baseline. Another, to establish the gap analysis on from where you were previously to where you are today. So depending on the nature or where you're at in your journey, you could deploy risk assessments in a variety of ways. The big thing that we see is being able to centrally manage and control assets, whether they're hardware, software, identities, application services, and data.
All right, so you've got an inventory down, you've got a workshop you've gone through to identify really what their requirements are and what their needs are. Then what happens next?
So next we help the customer understand that not everything may be achievable within a very specific time frame. So we look to prioritize things. So we look for low-hanging fruit first, kind of the highest ROI, lowest complexity to implement. And then we help create a roadmap that oftentimes will span multiple years.
For some of your clients, are they able to do some of this? You said a number of years. Are there things they're able to do quickly to help? Because right now, in this world of, I'll call it cybersecurity threats that are happening all the time, especially internationally, where you just can't control what people are doing, because they're in other countries, you can't go find them. How do you get somebody moving quickly? Because this is urgent, right?
Sure. Yeah, and so we have a toolbox that we leverage or help clients leverage to be able to get a lot of green lights very quickly.
Okay.
And
So
then
this is a toolbox you guys have developed at Parsolvo?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we call it our 80-40 tool set. Essentially,
So it's twice as good as 80-20. It's 80-40.
Exactly.
Something like that. Right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's 80% of the feature set, function, and capability at 40% of the cost and operating complexity compared to industry-leading,
So that's a good
supposedly
deal. If I'm getting
industry-leading
80% of
tools.
what I need for 40% of the price, that's a good deal.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I'm sold. Okay.
And the other thing that we talk about is the importance of understanding that so much of security is still human error. So you can deploy tools, and if done improperly, it doesn't matter. So being able to change that conversation to your IT group should also be your security group. So you shouldn't have a service desk manager that happens to every once in a while care about security. You have a security manager that runs your service desk. And taking that philosophy internally helps organizations be able to meet challenges that otherwise they feel like they wouldn't have the bandwidth or budget to do. So we try to take the toolset guidance and make it really digestible, assign it to an individual owner internally that can then execute a really small roadmap to make progress very quickly.
Okay, so you mentioned the human error aspect of it, because I continually hear whenever I talk to people about a cyber breach, it's always somebody clicked on something they shouldn't have. So what are some tips you have for organizations that maybe they've got a workforce that maybe they're not as savvy and they're more apt to open up stuff that they shouldn't? How do you prepare companies like that?
Sure. So one of the essential controls is actually around running business email compromise simulations. And in layman's terms, that's sending your own employees spam and seeing who clicks on what. And then once you gather those analytics, then you can deploy really targeted training to those individuals who are generally more apt to open or to click through on things that should be otherwise noted as suspicious.
Now, are most of the click through and click stuff, is that happening via email these days, or are there other ways that cyber criminals are getting into organizations?
Sure. Yeah. For the most part, it's going to be through email. There are some ad servers that still don't detect nefarious actors. So there is some web browsing. Most of that is allayed by just regular desktop antivirus, anti-malware software. But today, some of the most significant breaches were either from spreading ransomware through email or doing spear phishing, which spear phishing is where there's a really targeted email that is spoofed, meaning that it's representing as if it's from somebody in the company, say the CEO, and saying, hey Bob, I need you to wire to this account going forward instead of the existing account on file. And if you're not careful looking at it, it might look like a legitimate request. It might even match the organization's footer. There's no links that are external that would give it away. But the email was generated by a server that's not actually a corporate server.
Yeah, our CFO, Kathy, she got an email from me asking to ACH or wire $10,000 to me because I needed it, and I'm sitting in the office next to her. I'm like right there, and she said, "Did you send?" And I'm looking at her going, "Why would I mean, come on, who can be fooled by that stuff?" But I guess a lot of people still are, and especially if it's coming from the CEO and maybe he's in a different city or something. Oh, I better respond to him and send that wire transfer or whatever it is.
Yeah, I'll give you a real life example as well. One of my stories. So this was actually a managed service provider who hired a new sales guy, and he got an email his third day on the job from the CEO saying, "Hey, I'm at a conference, I'd like to be able to give away some gift cards. Can you run to CVS and get some prepaid gift cards and send me the codes?" And so he went and bought $2,500 in gift cards and sent the codes.
This is at a managed service provider.
At a managed service provider.
IT managed services.
Correct.
They probably provide cybersecurity help too, right?
Yes,
for customers.
absolutely. And it's at a very reputable one as well. So.
Yeah. We won't use their name or anything.
Correct.
But it's amazing. They'll target anybody. They're probably going more after some of these IT firms because then they can poke away at that, and they might let their guard down too.
That's a great point. So one of the things that, from an attacker standpoint, if you're going to spend time and energy to get into an organization's network, why not direct all that time and energy into a managed service provider network that's not set up on zero trust? And now you have leverage across access to all of their customers, 40, 50, sometimes hundreds of organizations. It's a much better bang for the buck from a criminal perspective, so to speak.
So going back to the whole zero trust concept, how many would you say, I'll call it large organizations have zero trust in play, truly have it in play versus don't?
I would say in terms of full adoption, there's very few currently today that meet all the different areas. But most of the large enterprises are well on their way to adopting it. Most of them have started their journey by deploying very simple upgrades to their antivirus, malware defense, and their internet and browser protections. That's kind of the block and tackle. So if you're starting your journey and you're not using a what's called an EDR, endpoint detection and response package, then that's probably step number one.
Okay, so there's still a lot of large organizations out there that have a ways to go. Are there particular industries that that you guys work with that probably help in advance further along?
Sure, yeah. Oil and gas and energy specifically, because of the nature of operations and the criticality of them, they probably have the biggest impetus to move towards zero trust. Also, the nature of operational technology dictates that eventually you go that route regardless. So
okay, and I would imagine if you're a financial services company, you probably already have a lot of this stuff in place. I would hope.
Correct.
Especially
Yeah.
my bank, they better have all this stuff.
Yeah. There's varying degrees for sure, but I would say that generally financial service providers and insurance companies would lead the charge in terms of security.
Gotcha. Well, this is interesting. So you mentioned energy. What about in the public sector side and like our federal government side? How far along are they with some of the zero trust concepts?
It depends on the agency. Some agencies are far more progressive than others. VA started the shift towards zero trust years ago.
With the VA, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So they've got a pretty mature Office of IT that's kind of governing that. GSA with their FedRAMP certified infrastructures, those tend to follow a lot of the premise of zero trust, even if it's called a different name. There's similar controls in place, as well as some additional controls that make sense just for federal agencies.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I have Joe Janeka here from Parsolvo, the CEO of Parsolvo. These guys provide a lot of IT expertise around operational information technology, and particularly around cybersecurity and kind of all aspects of cybersecurity. So you guys can essentially come into an organization and help them address any host of, I'll call it security issues, cyber threats, any type of things. Hopefully you're helping them before they have problems. Do most of your customers come to you because they've had a problem, or are they trying to be proactive?
Recently, it's been more proactive. They're reading the news and seeing some of the pipeline compromises and some of the managed service provider compromises, and their board is creating it as a business issue, as a driver. And we're the type of company that works backwards from whatever the customer's point of need is. So we don't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all approach. We like to listen to what customers have, where they're at, and then make recommendations on how to move forward.
So how about the smaller middle market, smaller type companies? I mean, should they be concerned and thinking about this as well? Because we talked about a lot of these enterprise, and we use a lot of terminology around NIST and that type of thing. But for them, what about them?
Absolutely, yeah, especially on the smaller side. If they have a managed service provider, they should be talking to their MSP about zero trust and about what that roadmap might look like relative.
Or get some free CVS gift cards from them.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then for more of the mid-market, it's going to be similar to an enterprise conversation. Usually the networks are a little bit more complex, and they're going to need a more structured roadmap.
All right. Well, Joe, I appreciate your time here today. Any closing thoughts or anything else you want to share with the audience?
No, this has been great. Thanks for having me.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on to the Jargon Podcast. We had Joe Janeka here from Parsolvo, and if you guys need to get in touch with him, just click on our info button on our podcast, and you can get connected with Joe from Parsolvo, our CEO. And we thank you, and you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, you too, Bill.